The homogenization of collision. What we lost when cities stopped being port towns. Will Durant observed that innovation historically came from port cities where the world collided. What happens when collision becomes optional and the comfortable opt out? There used to be a Pakistani newsagent on a street corner in Fulham, West London. Not the sanitized corner shop of Richard Curtis films, but a genuine cramped chaos of newspapers in 12 languages, calling cards for dodgy locksmiths, and sweets I'd never heard of, from places I couldn't pronounce. The owner, I never learned his name, which now shames me, knew everyone's business and everyone's cigarette brand. You couldn't buy your Guardian without encountering the Polish builder buying Timbark juice, the Somali taxi driver arguing about Arsenal, the elderly Jewish woman complaining about her knees. It's a Tesco Metro now, clean, efficient, anonymous, nobody argues about anything. In Queens, where I live now, when I'm not traveling, the same pattern plays out in slower motion, but with the same inexorable logic. The Dominican barber who cut hair on a folding chair outside his shop, gone. The Korean greengrocer who'd argue with you about which melon was ripe, replaced by a Trader Joe's where nobody speaks to anyone. The Puerto Rican social club where old men played dominoes and settled neighborhood disputes. Now luxury condos with a Peloton room. And Queens still pulses with elements of a real soul. Approach Manhattan and you can openly weep at the Boboization minted by David Brooks on display, that unfortunate fusion of the affectedly bourgeois with the faux bohemian, lacking both real taste or verve. We tell ourselves this is progress, maybe. It is. But it's progress towards what? The Port City Paradox. Will Durant, in his sprawling examination of civilization, made an observation that has haunted me for years. Historically, nearly every significant innovation in human culture emerged from port cities, not from the countryside, not from the suburbs, not from the protected interior, from the crowded, chaotic, dangerous places where the world literally collided. Alexandria, Venice, Constantinople, Istanbul, Amsterdam, London, New York, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Buenos Aires. There weren't just diverse cities. We fetishize diversity now as if it's an end in itself. These were cities where collision was unavoidable. The spice merchant from Kerala, the Dutch sailor, the Arab mathematician, the Italian courtesan, the Chinese silk trader, the Jewish businessman. They didn't choose to interact. Geography forced the encounter. You couldn't get your goods unloaded without dealing with the Longshoremen's Guild. You couldn't sell your spices without learning the local language. You couldn't navigate the port's politics without understanding the dozen different power centers. You couldn't eat without encountering unfamiliar food. You couldn't walk 5 blocks without your assumptions being challenged. The port city wasn't a metaphor for diversity. It was a forcing function for transformation. When success isn't enough, it's not even the small-time businesses that are rendered uneconomical anymore. Jean-Georges von Gerechten is a rock star chef. His innovative blend of Thai and French cuisine, honed at the Oriental in Bangkok, earned his eponymous New York restaurant recurringly 3 Michelin stars and 4 stars from the New York Times, their highest accolade. His next-tier concept, Spice Market, in the meatpacking district, was a remarkable amalgam of Asian street food, offered up in a swank, sultry, edgy, but sophisticated environment. It pulsed with life throughout its existence. This wasn't a marginal operation struggling to find its audience. This was a stunning success, culturally significant, critically acclaimed, and profitable. And then in 2016, after almost 12 heady years, they shuttered. Why? Jean-Georges, I can barely write this without gagging, found the rents too high. Think about that. Forget the first-time chef wanting to test himself in the city Sinatra sang of. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. Jean-Georges, with 3 Michelin stars and a proven track record, couldn't afford the rent for a concept that had been a stunning success for over a decade. So again, who is the city for? Dean and DeLuca took over the space, upscale commodity replacing innovation. Jean-Georges' eventual return to this location in 2024 was only possible by putting his name on a private members club called Margot. Who needs Asian street food when you can have exclusivity? And this is the pattern. Collision and innovation give way to accessible luxury, give way to pure exclusion. The trajectory is always the same, and it's always away from the port city dynamic Durant identified. So, again, who is the city really for? Not the innovators, not the culture creators, not even the successful restaurateurs with Michelin stars. The city is for those who extract value from it without creating anything. The landlords, the private equity firms, the global capital seeking for a safe haven that happens to displace everything that made the city worth investing in to begin with. The great opting out. The erosion has been underway for some time, a deadening of diversity, a coarsening of our capacity to interact and imagine. However, something fundamental changed precipitously in the last 30 years, and we've barely begun to reckon with what we've lost. The change wasn't just economic, though the economics are stark enough. Commercial rents in London and New York have been driven to levels where only 3 types of businesses survive. International chains with sophisticated capital backing, luxury boutiques serving the ultra-wealthy, or businesses engaged in regulatory arbitrage, including your vape shops and money transfer services. The artisan baker, the independent bookshop, the family-run restaurant operating on thin margins, they're functionally extinct in prime locations. But the deeper change is this: creative collision became optional for the first time in human history. You can live in a major city and never encounter anyone unlike yourself. Your algorithm curates your information. Your delivery apps eliminate the need to venture into unfamiliar neighborhoods. Your co-working space, I'm writing this in a WeWork in Manhattan, creates the appearance of collision while actually enabling its avoidance. Everyone in their pods, on their Zoom calls, AirPods firmly in place. The oligarchs who've colonized Mayfair and Belgravia, the sovereign wealth funds that own half of Midtown, the private equity managers in Tribeca, they live in London and New York seasonally, the way Roman proconsuls lived in conquered provinces, physically present episodically, economically extractive, but never actually there, never colliding, never transformed. Even those of us with more everyday wealth participate in this opting out. I can order from DoorDashers and never speak to another human. I can work remotely and never leave my apartment. I can curate my social life with such precision that I encounter only people who share my education level, my political views, my cultural references, and my opinions above all. Happily, for me anyway, that prophylactic existence fills me with existential dread, being a child of the old Manhattan and London and Tokyo, and having had a chance to encounter Dubai before it became an overbuilt construction site, and Oxford before its high street became unrecognizable from virtually all of its counterparts across the UK. So yes, the port city promised creative collision. The modern city offers a type of collision as an option, even more so as a mirage, which means the comfortable increasingly opt out. The suburban illusion. So people flee to the suburbs, to the ex-urbs, to Montana and Portugal and Costa Rica, to anywhere that promises distinctiveness, authenticity, soul. I understand the impulse. I feel it myself when every high street in Britain offers the same Boots, Costa, Tesco Trinity with a statutory Indian near the too often contrived pub. When every Brooklyn neighborhood gets the same faux industrial coffee shop with the same Edison bulbs and the same oat milk options. When every city begins to feel like an airport terminal with better architecture. Yes, the soul craves escape. But here's the tragedy. People are fleeing homogenization by embracing an even deeper homogenization. The suburb by design eliminates such creative collision entirely. Cul-de-sacs instead of through streets. Cars instead of sidewalks. Garage doors instead of front porches, curated friend groups instead of forced encounters with neighbors, HOA regulations ensuring nothing unexpected ever occurs. The nice restaurant serves the same elevated comfort food as every other nice restaurant in every other suburb of every other city. You get your farmhouse kitchen and your craft brewery, your meditation app, you get distinctiveness as an aesthetic choice, authenticity as a consumer product. What you don't get is creative collision. You don't get the friction that produces breakthroughs and insights and which hones our abilities and capabilities. You don't get the Moroccan cab driver's perspective on geopolitics. You don't get the arguing philosophers at the corner cafe. You don't get the impossible to ignore reality of how the other 99% live. You don't get your assumptions challenged by anyone who doesn't already share them. Durant's port cities worked precisely because creative collision was unavoidable. Geographic constraint, you couldn't sprawl infinitely. Economic interdependence, you needed the baker, the blacksmith, the merchant. Social proximity, narrow streets, shared wells, common threats meant you dealt with everyone. Necessary friction, you couldn't optimize away the difficult encounters. The modern suburb is engineered for the opposite. Maximum sprawl, minimum interdependence, maximum distance, frictionless existence. What the algorithm cannot give you. We've told ourselves a remarkably convenient story about innovation and progress. It goes something like this. Innovation comes from psychological safety and safe places where people feel comfortable sharing ideas. Creativity emerges from like-minded teams with aligned priorities. Progress requires removing friction and optimizing flows. The best ideas come from focused collaboration among people who easily understand each other. It's a lovely story. It also happens to be completely wrong. Durant's observation about port cities suggests something more uncomfortable. Innovation comes from necessary collision with the unlike-minded, the differently valued, the friction we cannot avoid or optimize away. When constructively undertaken and when we expand our paradigms to make room for this. The Renaissance didn't emerge from a safe place. It emerged from the fermenting interaction, the creative collision of Christian theology, Islamic mathematics, and recovered Greek philosophy in places where scholars, merchants, and rulers from different worlds were forced to do business together. The Enlightenment didn't come from aligned values. It came from coffee houses where aristocrats, merchants, scientists and radicals argued about everything, where vision expanding collision was both unavoidable and protected by the emerging norms of civil discourse. The explosion of American innovation in the mid 20th century didn't come from homogenous teams. It came from waves of immigration, from Jewish refugees fleeing Europe collaborating with Midwestern engineers, from the chaos of cities where you couldn't avoid encountering the unfamiliar. Even Silicon Valley's brief golden age came from collision. The defense engineers meeting hippie programmers, meeting venture capitalists, meeting academia, before it calcified into its current homogeneous monoculture of elite university graduates thinking remarkably similar thoughts. Dubai's myopic attempt to recreate Silicon Valley by creating regulatory freedom and a large campus, misconstruing this as a real estate project, and thinking it would coexist in a society where no one can migrate to, and so all contributors are essentially commercial mercenaries, was always going to be stillborn. In Dubai, if you miss a car payment and don't make it to the airport in time, you end up in the equivalent of debtor's prison. Silicon Valley was built on strategic swinging for the fences, failing and flopping, successive bankruptcies, failing forward. It was Edisonian in the spirit of being told, after 9,999 attempts to invent the light bulb, however apocryphal this may be, in believing I didn't fail, I discovered one more way not to invent the light bulb. The sponsoring culture in Dubai on these fronts is incongruent with innovation and enterprise. Taking this further, why were so many Silicon Valley entrepreneurs of Indian origin, and why were they hemmed in by the local bureaucracy and cultural inhibitions foisted on risk-taking and reinvention in their home country, and only liberated when they came into that new environment? This shows it's not ethnicity, not culture in the parochial sense, not venture capital or funding or empty forms. It's the agony and the ecstasy, as Michelangelo's biography put it, of what emerges from constructive rather than chaotic collision, and the creation and co-creation it engenders. The malaise beneath. The homogenization of London and New York isn't just about real estate economics or urban planning failures, though it's certainly both of these things. It's a symptom of how we've reorganized society around comfort and certainty rather than friction and emergence. We're losing serendipitous encounter, the conversation you didn't plan to have with the person you never would have swiped right on. That changes your entire perspective on a problem you've been stuck on for months. Productive friction, the disagreement that's uncomfortable enough to force new thinking rather than comfortable enough to ignore. The merchant and the philosopher arguing about value. The scientist and the theologian arguing about truth. The artist and the banker arguing about meaning. Enforced empathy, actually having to deal with people unlike yourself, not because you've chosen diversity as a value, but because you need them and they need you, the interdependence that makes dismissal impossible. Economic interdependence. When your success depends on the success of people different from you, you pay attention. When you can insulate yourself completely from their fate, you stop caring whether they exist. Cultural evolution, the organic emergence of new forms from collision, not jazz as a museum piece, but jazz as what happens when African rhythms collide with European harmony in New Orleans ports. Not fusion cuisine as a menu category, but fusion is what happens when immigrant cooks must feed dock workers with ingredients they've never seen before. What we get instead, algorithmically curated feeds that show us collision with our existing beliefs. Standardized chains offering predictability, safety, and soullessness. Segregated neighborhoods sorted by class, taste, politics, and algorithm. Digital pseudo-communities that are optional, disposable, and consequence-free. Diverse teams that somehow all went to the same few universities and think remarkably similar thoughts. Can collision be chosen? WeWork is the perfect metaphor for our current predicament, and I say this, by and large, appreciatively while sitting in one. The entire concept is brilliant. Create spaces where people from different companies, different industries, different backgrounds, theoretically collide. The port city dynamic, but with better coffee and fewer rats. Except, if not availed of in the right spirit, the danger can be that everyone's in their pods, on their calls, behind their screens. We would then have a port without any actual unloading of cargo. The ships dock, but they never open their holds, where anyone might steal, trade, or be transformed by their contents. We've then created collision as aesthetic, while engineering it away in practice. The question Durant's observation forces us to confront. Can you recreate port city dynamics when collision is optional? Can we choose the discomfort, the friction, the loss of control that real encounter requires when comfort is always one click, one move, one filter away? I'm not optimistic, but I'm not ready to surrender either. The human hunger for real engagement and interaction persists. It's why people still flock to cities despite the insane costs. It's why the faux pandemics, forced isolation felt so soul-destroying for so many. It's why people travel, why they seek out authentic experiences, even when those experiences may have been carefully curated for tourists, why they join communities and movements and causes. We know at some level that we need that varietal of collision, that the sanitized, optimized, frictionless life is a kind of death. The stories we tell. We tell ourselves that the high streets became monotonous because of efficiency and market forces and consumer preferences, all true. But beneath that is a story we've internalized, that friction is bad, that difference is dangerous, that collision is something to be managed and minimized rather than necessary and generative. We tell ourselves that suburban flight is about schools and safety and space, all true. But beneath that is a story that the good life means insulation from the unlike-minded, protection from the uncomfortable encounter, insulated curation rather than healthy collision. We tell ourselves that algorithmic filtering is about relevance and personalization and user experience, all true. But beneath that is a story that we should encounter only what we've already chosen to encounter, that surprise is an error to be optimized away, that the unfamiliar is a bug rather than a feature. And the casualty is genuine freshness, innovation, distinctiveness. How many movies today, for example, are derivative or remakes or rehashes of some well-flogged industry archetype? The dysfunctional stories that have saturated our lives and interactions are not entirely false. Efficiency matters. Safety matters. Relevance matters. But they're incomplete. They account for comfort but not growth, for certainty but not emergence, for optimization but not transformation. What remains? A Bengali restaurateur near South Audley in London, I never learned his name. I bought my dhansak, had the occasional exchange about cricket or the weather, and moved on with my day. But I encountered him. His existence was unavoidable on my regular trek, and so his restaurant on a harried or rain-splattered day kept beckoning. His perspective was inescapable. His world and mine collided in that small, frequently filled, at times achingly quiet restaurant, with amusingly repetitive music several times a week. The Tesco Metro that replaced him requires no encounter. I can use the self-checkout without speaking to anyone. The algorithm has already predicted what I want. Everything is optimized for my convenience and comfort. I can't even tell you what I've lost. Exactly. Just that something has been lost. Durant saw it a century ago in the historical record. We're living it now in real time. The port cities are closing their ports, and those aren't hubs anymore anyway. We defer to malls for that, and they cannot carry that load. Not even close. The collision is becoming optional, and we're telling ourselves we've moved forward. Maybe we have. But towards what exactly? Sterility? Seamless ego pandering? The question isn't whether we want the port city's vitality. The hunger for it is written in our flight toward anywhere that still offers a ghost of it. The question is whether we're willing to accept the discomfort, the risk, the lack of control that real creative collision requires. When I have coffee with my new acquaintance Sammy in January, he's a Londoner, sent by his company to work here in New York, we'll probably complain again about the oligarchs and the high streets and the homogenization of everything. We'll lament what's been lost. But will either of us actually choose creative collision? Will we seek out the uncomfortable encounter, the productive fiction, the necessary interdependence? Or will we retreat to our optimized, curated, collision-free lives, lamenting the loss of something we're not quite willing to pay the price to recreate? I don't know Sammy very well, but I sense a kindred spark. Don't count us out just yet. Durant's port cities worked because collision wasn't a choice. That's the thing we can't quite bring ourselves to say. The innovation came precisely because the discomfort was unavoidable. Can we choose avoidable discomfort? Can we help ensure it is constructive and catalytic, not masochistic? Can we opt into what geography once imposed? I don't know. But I know what happens if we don't. More Tesco Metros, more curated feeds, more comfortable isolation, more suburbs offering the illusion of distinctiveness while delivering deeper homogenization, more cities that are physically dense but spiritually empty, more collision as performance rather than as transformation. And suburbs could buzz if we opted for community rather than cliques, real engagement over cult-like sameness. It would require the infusion of energy and humanity and extending ourselves past the formalities of interaction. We could. Oh, if only we would. Maybe the next era of innovation requires us to deliberately recreate what geography once imposed. Maybe we need to build institutions, spaces, norms that make such generative collision unavoidable again, not through coercion, but through design that acknowledges what makes us fully human. Or maybe Durant's observation was describing something that can only emerge naturally, that dies the moment you try to engineer it, that cannot survive when comfort is always one click away. I hope his observation isn't a death knell for something so precious to our humanity, but a reminder of enabling conditions. We no longer have them. We have to seek to embody them and take a stand for them and educate ourselves to appreciate them and gain the human skills to welcome what once necessity and reality foisted upon us. Is that possible? The answer to that will determine our future, its potential, its vitality, its meaningfulness. Here's to creative contention and cultivating an appetite for real interactions, for having our spirits enlivened and our tastes expanded by the ineffable joys of real diversity. To experiences sought and cultivated of the type that render us more than the sum of our orthodoxies, agendas, and default settings. To humanity writ large.